Hello, good morning, and welcome to today's webinar on transportation and climate action. My name is Katie Kowalczyk. I'm a Water Resources Coordinator for the City of Minneapolis, and I am the chair of the Environment and Energy Research Council. I'd like to welcome everybody today to our webinar and meeting sponsored by the CTS Transportation Planning and Economy and also Environment and Energy Research Councils. A little background on the councils. The CTS councils provide a forum for transportation professionals and researchers to exchange information on current transportation issues and trends. They bring together university faculty and staff with practitioners from the public and private sectors to recommend direction and participate in improving the center's research, education, and engagement programs. Sam will share the link to the council's information in the chat shortly. So today's webinar features a presentation on empowering local governments, unveiling the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool for sustainable transportation solutions. I'll share more about this in a minute, but first we'll just go over a couple housekeeping items. So for questions and comments, we're very much looking forward to audience participation and questions during the Q&A time, which follows the presentation. We encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen at any time to type questions or comments for the speakers. During the Q&A, you could use the raise hand feature if you prefer, then we can unmute you so you can share verbally. If you do need credits for this, the event meets continuing education requirements for 2 professional development hours or 2 American Institute of Certified Planners certification maintenance credits. The PDH form will be uploaded to the chat for anyone who needs it. Finally, if there are any students joining today, could you please send a chat to all panelists with your name? We do track the number of students who are engaging our events and excited to see you here. So today we have a webinar that's going to begin with a presentation showcasing the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool, a collaborative project developed by the Metropolitan Council, along with researchers from multiple academic institutions, including the University of Minnesota. Following the presentation, a panel of experts will discuss the implementation of targeted and strategic climate actions in rural and urban areas. I'm excited today to present our speakers. So first we have Mauricio Leon, who is a senior researcher at the Met Council. He's also a PhD student at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And if that isn't enough, he's also my co-chair on the CTS Environment and Energy and Transportation Research Council. Frank Dama will be our moderator today. He's the Director of State and Local Policy and Outreach, Institute for Urban and Regional Infrastructure Finance at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, the University of Minnesota. And then our panelists are Abby Finnis, a co-host of the City Climate Corner and local climate consultant, Eric Robertson, Director for Strategic Initiatives, Millax Corporate Ventures, Deanna Chaman-Salas, Director of Climate and Resiliency for the Hennepin County Public Works Department, and Kathleen Mayall, a co-worker of mine at the City of Minneapolis as a transportation planning manager. So now I will turn it over to Mauricio, who is definitely taking on the largest part of this webinar for our councils for his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Can someone confirm if you can see my screen?
Looks great.
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't.
Yeah, Mauricio,
okay,
it looks
thank you.
We can see it.
Thank you. Okay, good. So good morning, everyone. As Katie said, my name is Mauricio Leon. I am a senior researcher at the Metropolitan Council. I'm delighted here to be presenting to you our new greenhouse gas scenario planning tool, which will be released this summer. We've been working for a couple of years on this project in collaboration with researchers from multiple academic institutions. And the main goal of the tool is to allow local governments to explore different transportation decarbonization strategies, so carbon mitigation strategies in the transportation sector, as well as other two sectors, which I will discuss a little bit later. But of course, we will be focusing on transportation today. I also wanted to start by giving you a little bit of context about the Metropolitan Council. Many of you are familiar with the Metropolitan Council. We are a very large organization. And among the things that we do is the transit and transportation planning for the region, the 7-county metro region. So that's over 180 local governments over 7 counties. And we run the transit system. We operate the transit system. We also do the wastewater treatment for most of our region. And the division in which I'm housed, so that's the community development division, we do long-range planning for our region. As part of that, we support local governments with technical assistance. A couple of years ago, we started developing technical assistance around greenhouse gas emissions. We identified this as a topic that requires a lot of technical work and that it could benefit from doing it at the Met Council because we already have some of the data sets that are needed for this type of greenhouse gas accounting. So that's why we're doing this work, and I'm gonna be sharing with you some results and giving you a preview of the tool. But I think I wanted to start this presentation today talking a little bit about what is everyone doing. So today we have a wonderful set of speakers that will be talking from different sectors of government. So a big question that I have and that I will be asking to the panel is how are our climate change goals aligned, and what is the collaboration that is happening around transportation decarbonization? And then after that, I will be presenting more on the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool. But to start, I want to start with the premise that collaboration is key to achieve decarbonization on the transportation sector. There's got to be clear communication, interagency and intergovernment partnerships in order to fulfill our climate goals. And the reason for this is that that's how we do more efficient work. That's how we prevent redundancy. That's how we prevent redundant programs. We have consistent regulations, and we have the biggest impact on climate change. There's also good to mention all the economic opportunities that can come from collaborating across units of government. So I decided to mention here some of the different frameworks that I saw. So I actually went and looked up at what are different scales of government doing and how are they framing the transportation, sustainable transportation. And starting with the federal government, you can see that they are looking at a long range of strategies that range from clean electricity, electric vehicles, public transportation. So they're really looking at a large array of solutions. And I think this is a good approach because what we know is that, and what you will see based on the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool, is that in order to meet our ambitious climate goals, we actually have to be looking at many strategies. We cannot just look at one single strategy in isolation. So at the federal scale, you have probably heard about the Inflation Reduction Act. That is the bill that passed last year. It supports transportation electrification by offering tax credits to zero emission vehicles. However, some of the critics have said that it doesn't really address the issues of car dependency. So one thing to keep in mind is that for the federal government, they don't have a lot of influence on land use. That's something that's going to be more on a local scale. So hence, we are looking at land use strategies at the local government scale. So continuing on to the state framework, Minnesota has been working on a climate action framework that is already released. This climate action framework has identified the areas where they want to focus on for mitigating climate change. Transportation is, of course, one of them. And so you can see here what type of strategies they are proposing. They're proposing things around transit, land use, clean fuel standards, and electric vehicles. One thing to notice at the state is that we recently had a new legislation passed. This new legislation will enable funding for better transit and the shift towards electric vehicles, and is funded by uh, um, less than 1% increase in the metro area sales tax. And then looking at examples of counties, we have Diana Shaman here with us today, so she can speak about the Hennepin County framework. But one thing that I wanted to highlight here is the emphasis on reducing vehicle mass travel, and again, promoting electric vehicles, and also here at the local scale, more at the local scale, you can see more emphasis on reducing disparities, so issues around equity and economic development. I also look at the framework of the city of Minneapolis. This is part of the climate equity plan that they're working on. And again, there's emphasis on transit, and there's emphasis on reducing vehicle miles travel, and also a lot of emphasis on equity. So the reason I presented that is to say that when you look at what everyone is wanting to do, you start noticing that there's a lot of consistency in the goals that the different scales of government have. Most people, most uh, organizations that I mentioned here are looking at strategies that seek to reduce vehicle miles travel and increase vehicle electrification. So this is something important to keep in mind, because if we all want the same thing, that means that we are more likely to collaborate. So the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool is a project that we started to really quantify what is the impact of this strategy. So we have a long list of ideas of things that we could do to reduce emissions in the transportation sector, but what is actually most cost effective? I think that's the problem that we wanted to tackle. I think that one important thing to mention here is that greenhouse gas emissions, while it's very important because of climate change, is not the only thing. There's a lot of co-benefits that we can obtain from doing some of these strategies. There are also unintended consequences that need to be considered. So I will break it down, what are kind of the strategies that we're looking at. But to give you a preview of what this is, it's really just a interactive web application. Here's what it's looking like right now. It's on the user interface testing. So we are actually getting feedback from our stakeholders to make sure that it is something that is accessible and easy to use. And some of the things that you would notice here is that transportation is one of 3 sectors that we're looking at. The user will be able to go and click on different strategies and make different assumptions, and they will be able to see it reflected on a graph and also on a table that they can later use for their own decision making. So this is really to inform decision making. I will say that it's based on a analytical model, so it's not based on something like a simulation or something more complex. So it really uses like the best available assumptions that we had to try to make this calculation. And the reason why this is important is because you want to prioritize the things that are going to give you the best return, right, for your investment. So this is what it's looking like. And again, it's going to be released soon in July. And a little bit about how we developed this was by assembling a team of interdisciplinary researchers from different academic institutions, as well as like nonprofit institutions, like the ones that you see there, ICLEI, being the organization that has developed a lot of the standards for greenhouse gas accounting in the United States. So we were working with Professor Anu Ramaswamy at Princeton, and Professor Kara Kokelman from University of Texas was the person who mostly developed the transportation side of things. But we're also working with faculty from the University of Minnesota. In fact, the University of Minnesota was the recipient of the of the um, uh, of the project award that we had for developing this tool. So when we were thinking about how we create this greenhouse gas scenario planning tool, we really had to look at the literature and see what are the categories of strategies that we should focus on. So what can cities, local governments do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And so these were the big 5 categories that we identified. And I'm gonna, each of them impacts transportation differently. So I'm gonna be breaking it down. The greenhouse gas scenario planning tool really consists of 3 different modules. So transportation is only one of them, but there's also building energy, and land use management are things like, for example, forestry. What is the impact of increasing our forested area in the metro region? But for the transportation side of things, we were looking mostly at strategies that reduce vehicle miles traveled, or strategies that make driving cleaner. So not necessarily reduce vehicle miles traveled, but actually the travel that happens is cleaner. So that could be the case with things, for example, such as electric vehicles. And I have to say, the reason why we look at these 3 sectors is because they represent the highest portion of greenhouse gas emissions. There are things that also release greenhouse gas emissions that are not mentioned there. For example, some industrial processes, but these are the biggest categories. So we look at these 5 different strategies within the transportation sector. We were looking at electrification, telework, road pricing, compact development, and transit, and I will be breaking them down for you. But to give you an idea about how we developed this tool, we started with the travel forecast that the Metropolitan Council has available. So the Metropolitan Council maintains a regional travel demand forecast model. And what this does is it actually gives you some data about what transportation could be looking like in 2040. So it takes a lot of different variables into consideration, such as land use development and economic growth and population growth and those sorts of things. And it's an activity-based model, so it means that it simulates transportation decisions made by individuals ranging from long-term to short-term. So, and then how do we get from the travel demand model, which gives you driving patterns, to actually greenhouse gas emissions? We then have to look at what are the different modes that we're forecasting. So are we forecasting more gasoline vehicles, more diesel vehicles, hybrids, EVs, plug-in hybrids? What is the ratios of vehicles that we are forecasting? And what are the forecasted fuel efficiencies? So for example, if we expect vehicles to get more a better fuel economy in the coming years, we have to put that into the calculation. We also have to take into consideration what are the emission factors for fuel. So what is the emission factor for gasoline, and that can change over time, depending on a number of things. So here you are looking at the results of the model that the group of academics that we were working on, the Sustainability Healthy Cities Network, produced. And this is only for the transportation sector. And what you can see here is that the brown wedge here is something called dynamic ride sharing with shared autonomous electric vehicles. So why did they include this? The reason they include this is that we are starting to see autonomous cars in some parts of the country. So for example, in cities of San Francisco and Phoenix, you can already see robot taxis. So this idea of autonomous vehicles is becoming more prevalent. And the fear is that if robot taxis become the new norm, you might actually have a lot of more vehicle miles travel, because then you have cars that are just driving with no one in there. And I know we were talking about autonomous vehicles for a long time, but you can actually already see it happening in some cities. So it's something that we cannot ignore. But for the purpose of the tool, we decided to emphasize the other strategies and take out the dynamic ride sharing, just because there's a lot of uncertainty around that. So we were looking at what is the potential of vehicle miles travel due to additional compactness, private electric vehicles. And of course, you have to, when you talk about electric vehicles, you have to talk about the grid. So compact development, of course, can reduce vehicle miles travel. By how much, it really gonna depend, because a lot of our region is already developed, and it's gonna be really hard to steer the boat into a different direction, especially if there are places that have already been developed in a car-centric manner. So there's a big discussion about what is the real impact of compact development. But I mean, there are certain things that cities can do, and that could include like adding more multifamily zoning and mixed development, also transit-oriented development. And this is something where can be done in collaboration with, again, all the different scales of government that I mentioned earlier. So this is we actually took the travel demand model, and one of my colleagues was able to run it for different scenarios. So traditionally, Met Council has operated from creating a single forecast of travel demand. And this is, can be an issue because there's a lot of uncertainty. So for example, with the pandemic, that might have really changed like the way in which the region is going to develop. That means that there might be less growth, or there might be things that happen in the coming years, and that might mean that we have more growth. With the pandemic, for example, we saw that some people decided to move to the suburbs. So that might mean that there's more, the growth that is happening is gonna be more dispersed. So what they did here is they modeled the travel demand for different scenarios, which I hope you can read here, but in this graph it's a little hard to appreciate the difference. So this other graph is a little clear. And so what you can see here is that for a high growth and compact growth scenario, you have more vehicle miles travel than for a low growth but compact growth scenario. And so you can see it for yourself here that in general, when you have compact growth, the vehicle miles travel are less than when you have dispersed growth for the same growth assumption. And this is as a relative to the business as usual scenario. So this is if we have higher growth than business as usual, or lower growth than business as usual. And this is measured in weekly vehicle miles travel. So I wanted to put this image here because it might seem that there's a small payoff for compact development. However, what the literature suggests is that cities that are more compact tend to have much lower greenhouse gas emissions. And the reason why that happens is that, for example, when we account for greenhouse gas emissions, um, you're not accounting necessarily for the people who already use transit, right? So if everyone who were using transit right now were to switch to single occupancy vehicles, then you will see a big spike, not only in greenhouse gas emissions, but congestion, and probably like it will have bad repercussions for public health. So that is the reason why when you plot density versus uh, greenhouse gas emissions per capita, you start to see that denser areas have less greenhouse gas emissions. But that's for cities across the world. What does it look like for Minnesota City? So I actually plotted that. You can see here that I took cities that are over 20,000 in the metro region, 20,000 people in the metro region. And you can see a similar trend where the more dense the city is, the less greenhouse gas emissions per capita. So that goes to show the importance of compact development. Minneapolis having some of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions per capita in the state, and St. Paul as well. So even if Minneapolis and St. Paul have some of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, you can see here that because of all the population that these cities have, there's still a very significant portion of the whole state's vehicle miles travel. So here you can see vehicle miles traveled by county, and you can see that the counties in the metro region, so Hennepin, Ramsey, Dakota, Anoka, Washington, Scott, are little less than half of all the states greenhouse vehicle miles travel. So it goes to show the importance of focusing on the metro region, because only in the metro region, more than 50% of the population of Minnesota lives. So it's going to be really important to collaborate across scales of government there. Here's for the Hennepin County, what cities have the vehicle mass travels of different cities. So you can see there, like, what are the biggest contributors are cities like Minneapolis, Bloomington, Maple Grove, Minnetonka. And you can see that in 2020, there was a big dip, and that was because of the um, pandemic and all the different restrictions that were for travel there. So now I'm gonna move into telework, which it's another great strategy. However, the thing to keep in mind with telework is that there might be rebound effects. So that means that yes, people might drive less because they're telecommuting, but it could also mean that because people are not working from home, they might want to move to places where they have more space. So that's still being studied, but overall, I think we see a positive impact on greenhouse gas emissions for telework. Another strategy, and I think the, Hennepin County has explored this too, is the idea of road pricing. And this strategy consists on actually doing things that increase the cost of driving. And it's not, again, the Metropolitan Council is not endorsing any of these strategies. We're just kind of doing the math here. But one thing to keep in mind is that with this type of strategies, while they might be very effective, there are significant equity considerations, because how does that impact people who are disproportionately affected by this type of taxes or fees. And then, of course, electric vehicles. Electric cars are one of the biggest strategies that we talk right now. I think that they definitely have a place, and yeah, they have no tailpipe emissions. But of course, when we talk about electric vehicles, we cannot do it without talking about the electric grid. And so in terms of the electric bill, like one thing to keep in mind is that the Minnesota just recently passed a new bill that mandates 100% clean energy by 2030. And there was a big discussion about this. Some utility companies, I mean, some groups were opposed to the bill, saying that it could decrease reliability. But what is important to mention here is that with such a um, ambitious energy standard, clean energy standard, if you do electric vehicles, that actually is going to have a really good payoff, because that means that the electricity that is powering your electric vehicles is actually coming from a very clean electric grid, regardless of what the implications of the bill are. And then, of course, like we can talk about transit. It's a definitely one of those strategies that a lot of the organizations that I mentioned are kind of highlighting. And I think that there's definitely actions that we can do to improve the transit service, which increases ridership, and that leads to people not driving their single occupancy vehicle and actually using transit, which reduces vehicle miles traveled. So one of the strategies is to improve the transit service, and that means increasing the frequency of service and the coverage of service. But also the other strategy is just to increase the average vehicle occupancy. So making sure that more people are putting having more people on more seats. That's what it means there. And I know there's a lot of like work that my colleagues at Metro Transit are doing to promote to improve transit. And there's also a lot happening at the legislative level, but here I just mentioned some of the programs that they have currently, and that is not even mentioning all the planned expansions of the BRT and the light rail transit system. So definitely one thing that makes me really excited is to see how transit continues to develop. And I think this is one area where transit is possible due to collaboration between all units of government, from the state to the counties, to the Met Council, to the local governments. And that's all I got. I think we're over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and I can keep you all folks posted with the release of our greenhouse gas scenario planning tool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mauricio, for that excellent presentation. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Carlson. I am the chair of the Planning and Economy Research Council. Mauricio, we have a number of questions that came in that I think are really great for discussion today. The first one that I'll start with mentions a recent RMI study on compact development. And in case you're not familiar with that off the top of your head, the subtitle to the study is the missing key to climate action strategies for lowering emissions, increasing housing supply, and conserving land. Do you happen to know that study, and do you happen to have thoughts on it?
I don't know about the specific study that you're mentioning, but it does. I do remember seeing some evidence that increasing the housing supply has definitely benefits for greenhouse gas emissions. I think when I think of that, I mean, my mind goes to mixed development, all the opportunities that we have there. The idea being, now we have this changing urban landscape. For example, some areas in downtown, like commercial real estate, is not doing very well. That's an opportunity to actually shift towards more housing in the downtown areas and actually encourage mixed development. So with mixed development, people don't have to go as far away to actually meet their daily needs, so they can find the groceries nearby. So definitely there's an opportunity to put housing and climate together. And actually, I was just reading a paper about climate action plans that emphasize equity, sometimes don't really go far enough to actually say how. And when climate action plans only focus on things like tree planting and recycling and parks, that is not necessarily like addressing the fundamental question of creating infrastructure that addresses the needs of people in disadvantaged positions. So I don't know. I imagine there are people in the audience who have excellent thoughts on that. So I think this is something that we should carry to the panel.
Excellent. I will do that. All right. Next question was a clarifying question. On the slide that shows the VMT, just looking for clarification on, has the regional VMT still not reached 2019 levels?
I don't know from the top of my head. We had data till 2021, and this was based on data from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. There's still not clear to me that it has come back to whatever we're gonna call normal. And if it's gonna come back to normal with so many people actually shifting to telework. So I think we have to look for more information and more data on that. But it's definitely something that some folks at our Metropolitan Transportation Services have been studying about the impact of the pandemic on vehicle miles travel. One thing to mention here is that we should not just assume that it was people teleworking. Some people actually lost their jobs, and there was a lot of there's a lot of reasons why there was this dip besides just people teleworking. So I think that it's important that we take this question very carefully.
Excellent. Thank you, Mauricio, for that thoughtful answer. We have a number of other really great questions coming in, but I love how you noted that it would be great to get the rest of the panel in the discussion. So Frank, if I can turn it over to you and we can welcome the panel.
Great. Thanks so much, both Mauricio and Mary, for getting a lot of good information out there that folks have been working with. I do also note that, as Mary did, there are a number of good questions there that our panelists may want to consider responding to. As otherwise, we will hold those until we've had a chance to hear from each of our panelists. As was noted at the beginning, I'm Frank Dama with the Humphrey School, and you guys probably don't need to hear much more from me given the rest of the panel. So I am going to just work my way through the panel and ask them to take a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and also the work that their organization is doing in this climate action space, and provide some of their own initial reactions and comments to the work that Mauricio presented. And after that, we will get into more of a freewheeling discussion, including some of the questions from the Q&A that Mary will be monitoring. So with that, why don't I'll kind of work my way alphabetically by first name, which means that the first person I'm going to turn to is Abby.
I suppose that's my lot in life, starting with AB. So good morning, everybody. I'm Abby Finnis, principal at Local Climate Solutions, and very happy to be here discussing transportation strategies with you all. I am also a co-host, and I believe my co-host Larry Kraft is on this call, of a podcast called City Climate Corner. And in both my work as a consultant and in our podcast endeavor, we really try to focus on small and medium-sized cities and what they are doing to address climate change, both from a standpoint of mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as adaptation. And oftentimes those solutions kind of go hand in hand. And I think that a major area is transportation. It is our largest source of emissions now, and it's the one that I think that we've had a hard time tackling. And, speaking from a podcast example, we have over 50 episodes, and I think we have like one that touches on transportation, because it's really hard to find good examples of transformative transportation greenhouse gas emissions reduction examples, not just in small and mid-sized cities, but also in larger cities. I know that there's a lot of work to be done, but there's also a lot of opportunity, especially as we kind of compare ourselves to peer cities in European countries and South American countries. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity in this space. And so just kind of quick high level examples, the episode that we did do is with Fayetteville, Arkansas. That's about a population of 95,000 or so people, college town. They're doing some really cool stuff with bikes. They are fortunate to have the Walden family there who are super into bikes and put a lot of money into biking infrastructure. But they're there building out a bike network, and it's not just for recreational purposes. They want people to travel by bike within their community. And so they have seen a big uptick in that. And so I think that that's kind of an example of a regional economic center, of which we have a number in Minnesota, looking at what can we do within our community to not just reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but to provide safer and more active, healthier alternatives to transportation within our community. And then I'll kind of swing a little bit different to a smaller community, Red Wing. Mauricio talking about a wide range of transportation strategies that we can employ to address greenhouse gas emissions, but they are very context specific, right? They're not going to be the same in Red Wing as they are in Minneapolis. And, when I worked with them on their climate action work plan, that's something that we heard is, we commute differently. We need to focus on electrification of vehicles rather than transit, rather than some of these other opportunities. So that's just kind of, an example of a smaller community where that vehicle electrification is more practical for them and their commuting standards. And then you go up to more rural places like Finland, Minnesota, or somewhere, smaller populations, larger vehicle miles, where electric vehicles are not something that they see as practical alternatives. So they need to start thinking about what are some different solutions. Maybe that's different fuels that we're using. There's exploration of hydrogen or compressed natural gas, some other things. So I think keeping all of the options on the table is really important. And so I'll just kind of sum up that, with this new bill being passed, where MnDOT is required to look at vehicle miles traveled to meet our greenhouse gas emissions goal, Met Council is required to do the same thing. We put the flexibility was built in so that you can think about that regional context. What are the needs of these smaller communities? How do we reduce VMT over here so that we can have this project that is more regionally appropriate over there? So I'll just kind of close with that and go to the next person.
Great. Thank you, Abby. And again, just to show that I am humbled to be with this group, I can't even alphabetize properly. With that, I'm going to flip over to the person whose name actually does come sooner than Abby's if you're alphabetizing, and that would be to Arik.
Thanks, Frank. No worries about that. I'm used to going first, so it's nice to go second sometimes. But bonjour, everyone. My name is Eric Robertson, Indigenous Jaganashi monk, and Shwagush Indigu Ojibwe monk, Magizi and Dudame, Jawanga Kabakang, and Dun Jaba. My name is Eric Robertson in English. Fox is what the spirits call me in Ojibwe. I'm of the Eagle Clan, and I'm originally from South Minneapolis. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures. So I'm basically responsible for developing new businesses within our tribe. So Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures is also very unique since we're the economic development arm of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. So we're really charged with housing all the different band's businesses, which do include two profitable casinos that you probably have heard of, Grand Casino Mille Lacs and Grand Casino Hinckley, as well as a portfolio of other different businesses. We own things like a grocery store in the community, 3 different gas stations, convenience stores, a movie theater, as well as several other different businesses. So really what we do is as a corporation is all of our different profits go back to our shareholders. So any money that we make really goes towards things like language, cultural preservation, housing, health services. So that's kind of where we're charged with what we do. And that's what really kind of got us into the renewable energy space and looking at some of those options, really as a way for operational efficiency, to save some money, and also, to grow the money that we give back to our shareholders. So it really started this path to what we're doing is looking at different carport options for different casino properties. But we found that with the different types of grants and money available for us, they really didn't pencil out those projects. So we kind of had to look at different options. We eventually built a 3.2 megawatt solar array project up by Grand Casino Hinckley as a way just to reduce our carbon emissions and provide some of that needed energy to our casino property there. So now we really have 4 different ideas when we're looking at renewable energy projects and what we want to accomplish. And we want to create a positive environmental impact. We want to attract and retain associates. We want to influence consumer choices, and we also want to, save some money at the end of the day. And so that's where we kind of get into, some of the different projects we've done and what we're looking to do in the future. We're bringing back a car lot or a carport project at Grand Casino Mille Lacs, which will offer, electric vehicle charging stations, covered car for guests, parking, and those types of things. So we're really kind of young on our journey to, establishing energy sovereignty and developing a strategic plan that will allow us to carry into the future. This also involves working with the Mille Lacs Band as well in different cabinet level departments like the Department of Natural Resources, Housing, and the efforts that they're doing to also, do weatherization, some of the low hanging fruit to really kind of do those things first in our energy plans. So I'm happy to really talk about all the different things that we're working on the corporate side, some of the things that I know that the Mille Lacs Band is doing on the government side, but ultimately we're all trying to work together here to create a more sustainable infrastructure, because we know that will kind of help bring more money to the economy and allow us to actually build some of that infrastructure to increase or lower those different types of travel emissions. So that's really what I have for my introduction and what we do at Mille Lacs, and I'm happy to kick it off to the next person.
Thanks, Eric. And we'll definitely be getting into reactions to Mauricio as we move into this as well. And I will quickly move it over next to Diana.
Hey everyone, I'm Diana Chaman-Salas. I'm the director of the Climate and Resiliency Department at Hennepin County, and very excited to be with all of you. If I can speak on the aspect of transportation decarbonization, our climate action plan is really broad, but as was mentioned before, an important amount of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from transportation. Based on our greenhouse gas inventory, close to 40% of our all county emissions are coming from transportation. And so that led us to working on identifying how to reduce those emissions with a focus on VMT reduction, as well as implementing a green fleet strategy. And now we're assessing the potential for using our Hennepin County facilities for deploying EV charging infrastructure for public use. So lately, what we've been working on is advancing the Minnesota Department of Transportation goal of 20% reduction in VMT by 2050. And so for that, we set up an assessment with a pathway to achieving a specific VMT per capita reduction goal. Last year, we recommended to our Board of Commissioners 20% VMT per capita reduction by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of MnDOT's VMT reduction goal. So we're very excited about that and a little overwhelmed with what that means. We're currently identifying best strategies to implement, and also how can the county lead by example, but also identifying where can we advocate for and support the implementation of external partners to help us achieve that goal. For the county, the main issue is lack of jurisdiction on land use, which happens to be the greatest element that would support VMT reduction. So we need to coordinate very closely with MnDOT as well as with Met Council. We're currently identifying what are those specific strategies. And going back to what Mauricio was sharing before, some of those would reflect on CDM strategies, and the county is currently supporting remote work policies, promoting access to carpool programs. We're currently in the process of updating our complete and green streets policy with the purpose of identifying areas for implementing resilience within our infrastructure, and also implementing green areas within all of our programs and projects. We're also supporting compact development. Hennepin County does have a specific TOD grant to support mixed development, which is really exciting, and we're trying to expand that. And we're constantly investing in transit and active transportation. One concrete example is the Blue Line LRT expansion project, which also includes an anti-displacement engagement effort, which is really interesting. We're trying to learn from those examples and expand them throughout the county. There's a specific project that Project Delivery has, which is the Cost Partnership Program, which supports VMT reduction and other green areas expansion with cities across the county. And we're trying to use this as a pilot to learn from that experience. And as I've mentioned before, we're implementing a multi-sectorial strategy to create this roadmap towards VMT reduction, where the county can be facilitating and also serve as a leader in this process. Additionally, we're also sitting at the table in different spaces from the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Committee held by MnDOT, and I see some familiar faces joining us today, such as Ross Stark here, so very happy to have you all here. And then I didn't mention this before, but we also have a green fleet strategy. 22% of our light duty vehicles currently are hybrid or EVs, and we have the goal of identifying how to convert all of our fleet to EVs by 2030. Along with that, we're deploying charging infrastructure within our county buildings, both for internal fleet, but also for public use. And we have a specific pilot for implementing a microgrid for redundancy and resiliency in one of our sites, which is Public Works Medina. That's a very high level summary of what we're doing. Happy to be here with all of you.
Thanks so much, Diana. And around 10:30, we did have a question come in on the Q&A asking if there is a link related particularly to the plans for cutting VMT that Hennepin County may have. And I'll invite you, if there is such a link, to provide that answer at your convenience, either in the chat or answering on the Q&A. Next, we will go to certainly by alphabet last, but by no means anyways least, to Kathleen.
Well, like our A presenters on the panel, my last name used to start with a Z, so I was always used to being last. So shocking that I am even with the middle of the name alphabet now. At any rate, good morning still. I'm Kathleen Mayell with the City of Minneapolis. I'm in our Public Works Department and a Transportation Planning Manager. I focus on our policy planning work, transit coordination with Metro Transit, and partnership projects with the state and the county. I am not in our climate office. However, I very much consider the work I do to be climate focused and climate first. To give an example of our recently, well, I guess 2 years ago plus, passed Transportation Action Plan. I mean, you could call it a climate action plan in my mind. And in fact, the climate framework that Mauricio shared some of the goals and slides from, we worked hand in hand with our sustainability office in terms of developing those metrics and really pointing toward our Transportation Action Plan as to how we anticipate getting and reaching those goals. So with that plan, one of kind of some of the first that we did was we, for the first time in the city, adopted a mode split goal, where our goal is to have 60% of trips taken by means other than a car, so walking, biking, and transit, by 2030. And we were starting at a 2019 baseline of about 32%. So it's an almost doubling of trips. And the pandemic data, of course, like we saw, in the first 2 years, a big increase in walking, a big decrease in transit, and that kind of evening, or like just staying steady in terms of vehicular traffic, a little bit of a decrease of multi-occupancy vehicles, and then an increase of single occupancy. So, we'll see how that pans out over time. But there's a lot of ways that the city, we are working toward these shared goals. There's efforts in partnership with the city of St. Paul and the EV car share, electric vehicle charging stations, our shared bikes and scooters, e-platforms there, and then our planning and policy work as well. We, similar to the county and the state, have established VMT reduction goals and greenhouse gas reduction goals related to transportation. And pretty similar to what Diana was saying, if I could extrapolate a little from what you were saying, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you see yourselves in terms of when you talked about going kind of deeper than the MnDOT goal, because Hennepin County is such a dense part of the state. Similarly, at the city, I'd say we can gain a lot of gains here as well, where we have the land use, we have population density. So really striving to even go beyond. And I mean, we see it at a microcosm too within our city in the downtown core. How can we really incentivize walking and biking where we have that land use even more pronounced? I do think Russ's comment in the question area about where the greatest potential is for those first and second ring suburbs is a good one and a good point. I do agree with him. We can keep doing this more in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and we will. But I agree. I mean, we have opportunities certainly in the suburbs, and I think by having it be a seamless interaction too, going city, first ring suburb, what have you, makes a lot of sense. Maybe a couple other things to note here. It is convenience, the wrong word, but it's good that climate reduction strategies when it comes to transportation really align with some of our other top priorities of safety and equity. So, you know, you don't often hear of person walking or biking being the person, you know, the cause of a fatal crash on our streets, those types of things. So really aligned with our Vision Zero goal in terms of how much it costs people to get around, and really focusing on opportunity and really using transportation as a force for economic stability within our city is another angle that aligns with this climate action angle. And then one other thing maybe I'll just put into the sphere of this discussion is e-bikes, and personal e-bikes as another tool toward going toward these shared climate goals. There's a lot of models, or there's beginning to be more models nationally of different, you know, voucher programs and whatnot, and that a voucher program just passed at the state legislature this session as well. And so I think that there's a lot of potential there for replacing vehicular trips with e-bikes moving forward as well. And yeah, happy to keep the conversation going as we answer more questions.
Great. Thanks, Kathleen. And thanks to all the panelists. I think we might want to, if he's feeling up for it, invite Mauricio to also join in on the conversation. And Mary, I know that you're champing at the bit with a lot of questions, but I will just take the moderator's prerogative for one sort of kickoff here, which is building on Kathleen's response to Russ and picking up on Mauricio's point about collaboration across governments. One thing that jumps out to me in particular is the role of land use being a very local power in Minnesota, but a lot of these solutions are operating more on the regional level. If any of our panelists would like to take a minute or two to further expand on how and follow up on Russ's question about how different jurisdictions with common interests can work together given the powers that they have to be able to move in these directions.
You know, one interesting thing the tribe did with our 3.2 megawatt solar array is we actually leased that land to a developer who built and they maintain the array for zero cost. And it's a 30-year land lease, so that gave them a lot of value to come in and build this system for us. And then we were able actually to do it at no cost to us because we worked with a consultant to find this people to come in. That turned into a sleeved power purchase agreement with East Central Energy. So we're all kind of winning in that deal and that agreement. So that was a really collaborative effort between a co-op, energy co-op, an independent company, and us, a tribal government and a tribal development arm, to really make that deal happen. And again, it was a winning situation for all of us, where we were all able to leverage different pieces that we have to bring that to the table. Since we are a sovereign government, we do struggle with some of the different tax incentives because we do not have to pay taxes at the state and federal level. So trying to monetize those different incentives are also things that we have to struggle and grapple with in order to pencil out some of these different energy projects that will really improve our climate efficiency in our region.
Thanks, Eric. Any of the other panelists want to kind of follow in? Diana, you've unmuted yourself. Great.
Yes, I think that there really is the $1 million question, because we're all trying to understand how can we better support each other? How do we bring all of these different jurisdictions together? How do we make sure that not only a couple of cities that have their own climate action plans and have a lot of awareness and interest and resources to implement these policies can, make the best use of, say, federal funding to implement complete and green streets and such, and make a better use of the land management, but also supporting the first ring suburbs, the exurban communities that maybe have less resources and will need more administrative support as well as a vision. That's where I think, spaces like, I will speak on behalf of the county, Hennepin County has the role of facilitating and supporting the implementation of these policies. That's something that we're seeing ourselves as leaders. The main caveat is how do we, connect this with the state level and also the MPO level. And that's something that really requires a lot of leadership and the ability of facilitating spaces for conversation, but also implementation. It's almost, I think it's a two-way street, but a bottom-up approach by coordinating directly with the cities. And then from the other side, there's a great opportunity with the omnibus transportation bill that was recently passed, where we do have a VMT reduction requirement for the capacity expansion projects in the State Transportation Improvement Program and also for Metropolitan Improvement Program. So that will require a lot of coordination and also identifying how do we best implement these policies.
Thanks, Diana and Mauricio.
Yeah, so I think on this question of land use, and I wanted to follow up on the question that someone brought about housing, and to recognize that what we call NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard, when it comes to affordable housing, it's not just a phenomenon of, we typically think that happens in the outer suburbs, but it actually happens a lot in like the core of the cities. And I was actually reading about the example of Toronto in Canada, where they actually were trying to stop development on the basis that it will obstruct the view of a lake. And so, we all have to do some soul searching. This is not a thing that happens just in certain types of community. There's NIMBYism everywhere on the basis of, where all these people are gonna park. I think it really understand that part of what makes affordable housing difficult is that, people don't want it near them. So it's something that we need to fight actively, I think, if we want to have that conversation about density, upzoning, and actually affordable housing.
Great. Thanks, Mauricio. We could probably continue this discussion right up to the end of our time and possibly the end of the day if we really wanted to, but I'm going to turn it over to Mary, who's got a number of other questions that folks have been sending in.
Thank you, Frank. One of the first questions that is catching my heart today is a very human question, and it is based in sort of in the professional realm, we call it risk management, but in the human realm, we call it fear, right? One of the points is about a lack of a redundant power supply and a distribution system. I'll add that part onto it as well. So can you talk to us about sort of what the practical, Eric, you said it the best, energy sovereignty, right? Of this idea of we need to be sovereign in our own selves, but also be working in community together. So can you talk a little bit about that energy distribution piece and how that relates to climate change?
Yeah, certainly. And so, for us, we are located about 2 hours north of the Twin Cities. So we are in a rural environment. We know that our average employer has to drive about 40 to 50 minutes just to get to and from work. So we know it is not only a concern for the environment, just for, having a quality of life for the people that work for us in East Central Minnesota. So that's why we try to work on these things to really increase the infrastructure, to make it a better place to live. We've built workforce housing. We're continuing to develop that just to keep people closer to where they can live and work, to really try to increase that even density in some of the smaller towns like Onamia and Hinckley here in northern Minnesota. Those are things that we're working on at a smaller scale, rural level, that we know we can do. Because going and investing in a lot of the different transportation infrastructure, things like that, we don't have the density, we don't have the traffic that makes those things really work out for us at the time. But the goal and the hope is to continue to build those communities and that infrastructure so we can get to the place where that will be a thing that people might need or they can rely on.
Thank you, Eric. And Abby, how about you? Have you heard about energy sovereignty and the work that you've done with the smaller communities?
Yeah, I think that Red Lake is a really good example. They have a goal to be energy sovereign, and Bob Blake has been leading the effort, I think, to give more power to tribal communities over energy generation and distribution. And so I think that it's a really good way to think about and frame up, where does our power come from? And, what does that mean for our lives? And I think that he frames it so well in terms of economic development for the community, in terms of clean air for the community, in terms of just power over purchasing the power. So oftentimes I think that folks get caught up with their electric bills, and we're subject to increasing fuel costs for generation when it's coming from fossil fuel sources, whereas renewable energy is not perfect yet, right? And we talk about needing storage, and we need backup power, and we need to be smart with how we use power. But it's free fuel. You are locking in the price for decades to come. And so I think, looking at Red Lake as from everything from, manufacturing, installation, and creating that energy sovereignty within their community. St. Cloud is a really good example of their government operations going after renewable energy in a way that saves them money and gives them long-term price outlook on, what their energy bills are going to look like. And so I think there's a lot of power in, kind of taking hold of that energy. I think there's pros and cons to, transmission and distribution systems and being able to supply a lot of people with power, and also, making more kind of community-centered power and making that a part of the portfolio too. So I think it's definitely something that folks are thinking of. And there's all sorts of ramifications. Mauricio talked about NIMBYism, right? Where is all this power going to go? Who's benefiting from it? So I think those are always questions that we need to ask: is who's benefiting from any new project in terms of both money, air pollution, and who gets served.
Thank you, Abby. That's excellent. So speaking of sovereignty, one of the ways that we can be sovereign for ourselves as individuals is by using our people power, right? By biking, by walking. So building on the theme that Russ Stark started in the question and answer, thinking about first and second ring suburbs, and then also building on the safe routes to school and getting kids started. What are your thoughts about being inclusive on that sovereignty, so that we're not just looking at able adults, but we're also looking at children, elders, people with disabilities, and how can they see themselves in this conversation?
In our transportation action plan, we put forth a vision for our AAA network, which stands for All Ages and Abilities Network. So very much to your point, Mary, about inclusivity in terms of who feels comfortable biking. And I think many folks in the transportation space are probably familiar with that stat, and I'll get it wrong about like small amount of people are fast and fearless any type of road on down, right? And so we are really trying hard to build a system of bikeways, which can be used for scooters and other types of adaptive bicycles, and for people in wheelchairs, that is comfortable. And just yesterday I was biking with my 4-year-old son, and we were biking on one of the new bikeways, and I said, how does this feel? Do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Right? And he said, yeah. And it's like, you can't create that on your own, right? You need investments at a large scale from a city, government, county, state, federal money, what have you, to be able to do that. And you can't just have one network, right? And this gets to the kind of like interconnected first ring suburbs too. It's like, how do we build this network that really does allow for that freedom? And I oftentimes think about bicycling for my children in particular as their freedom, right? Like they get to choose when and where they go. And so I do think it's a really important angle to keep in mind is kind of that full spectrum of people and mobility, and how it does give that sense of freedom.
I want to also offer an answer to the question, because recently at Met Council, about a month ago, we had what I think was one of the most special moments I had working there, which was this youth engagement. There were about 30 or 40 people under 20, presenting and speaking directly to our council members. And it was very powerful because I mean, these young people were very vocal about what they want to see in the region, how they feel about transportation issues, how they feel about housing issues. And I think I won't forget one moment during the meeting where there was this young man talking to one of our council members, and she asked, it sounds like people are not feeling like safe at the transit system. What do you think would be a solution? I thought that was a really interesting exchange. And he say, well, I don't necessarily think it's more policing. I think that it could be just having more representatives from Metro Transit at the light rail or the buses. And I have to say that they are actively working on that, not just at Metro Transit, but at the legislature. But I thought that, people often know what works best, and it's so important to hear to young people, because at the end of the day, they're gonna be the ones inhabiting this region in 2040 when our like night charts are get to fruition. So yeah, definitely I encourage that. And if anyone wants to hear more about that model of engagement, I think I can connect you with the group that was working on that.
Just piggybacking on what Mauricio was saying, so Hennepin County is part of this transit impacts research program that U of M has within CTS, I believe. And so we were talking about a specific project, a multi-jurisdictional project to assess how do we increase a sense of safety with LRT expansion projects. And so one thing that came out in this meeting that was just yesterday is how do we make sure that we're not crossing, criminalization of at-risk populations, such as, homeless populations or people that may be in need of additional services. And how do we make sure that we're crossing that with proper engagement and access to those services that could not only help the, increase the ridership, but also make sure that other people are getting the services that they need. And that obviously complicates things, but that's definitely the human side, as Mary was saying, that we need to bring to the work that we do. Not only safety should be part of that, or inclusion, but also equity.
Excellent. All right, building on that. So we've talked about, and Mauricio, your presentation did an excellent job of laying out our different strategies for how to approach managing climate change. One of the questions from our group is, can you comment on the return on investment for education and encouragement? The context for their question is specific to safe routes to school, but if you want to expand beyond safe routes to school and talk about that in the work that you've done at each of your organizations in terms of return on investment for education and encouragement.
And if I can just jump in on that a little bit more to expand the question to not only those with the return on investment, but how do education measures fit in with all of the other plans that you all have been discussing?
And I wish I had a better answer, but one of the things that we look at was behavioral interventions. But I feel like that falls short, because you can model that based on the literature, say, okay, if you actually incentivize people to drive less or bike, you can get this return. But I know it goes well beyond that, because education is just so essential, and building the leadership that is gonna, move our region forward. This morning, I was just reading, with all the legislation that passed recently, Minnesota is now the leader. I think it's hard to argue against the fact that Minnesota is the leader in the Midwest on climate. Yet, we are one of the states with less risk of climate hazards. So less risks from fire, less risk from flooding. So it's interesting that we have such a engaged community and that we're doing all our best. One of the things that I do besides the Met Council is I volunteer for Serve Minnesota. And I think there's all these organizations doing excellent work on developing our workforce for the future. I think that, again, we cannot just talk about education in terms of what gives you for greenhouse gas emissions, but you have to think about what it gives in terms of human capital development, in terms of like actually increasing the economy. So I'm not going to comment a lot on that just because I think it really is like so ubiquitous that I think that any answer will fall short.
I think just following up on what Mauricio was saying, sometimes, especially in the climate world, we have this very limited vision of everything is greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and that's okay. But I think it's really good, going back to what Mary was saying on the human aspect of our work, bringing that back to what is the effect on reduction of air pollution? What is the effect on health-related conditions? It could be asthma or pulmonary chronic diseases. Are we bettering the living conditions of our communities? You know, if we're investing in active transportation and multimodal frameworks of work, how is that reflecting on better access to services and income increase and such? That's on the aspect, on the human aspect, but also I think we should look forward and also include a resilience lens on the work that we do and the transportation investments. Going back to what Mauricio was saying on, are we investing in infrastructure that will be able to withstand shocks in the future?
I can jump in a little bit on the return on investment, education, encouragement. We do have a number of strategies and actions within our transportation action plan that focus on education encouragement for biking, walking, and transit. And it's hard because we don't have like, yeah, the ROI is right? It's really hard to measure. It's really hard to track over time. And there's kind of this universal, like, it kind of works, right? Like, or it's important. And so like, how do we keep investing and gaining traction and finding budget to do that is kind of hard. But a couple things that we have been able to do over the past few years is supply MPS with a fleet of bikes for the 4th and 5th graders, like learn to bike. I think in tandem with that walk, bike, fun curriculum that Maya talked about in the chat. We also recently have a e-bike fleet for city staff at the downtown campus to be able to go out on site visits, inspections, you know, look at our work, learn from it, that type of thing. We have a lot of people, you know, we used to have I guess we still do have a pool car, but like having e-bikes that we're able to use and really integrate into our workflow. With our speed limit reduction work, we did do a education campaign on the 20 is funny, those signs that you've probably seen around Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we are actually investing a bit in a behavior change campaign coming up here soon. You might see it hit the streets at the next open streets. You know, looking at giving different modes a try and such. So if anyone does have anything more specific on ROI, it'd be awesome to see it. And in the meantime, we'll keep trying.
Yeah, one of the things, oh, sorry, go.
Please go ahead, Eric. You go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that I constantly have to do is educate our shareholders and our stakeholders why renewable energy is also a good investment for the tribe, because it's not something that just I can show them like, you know, a balance sheet and show them like, hey, this is going to make us a ton of money right away. No, it's playing that long game and helping people understand that's the positive environmental impact. That's why we're doing it. We're sticking to our own cultural values and why we're making the investment into these areas. Because again, it's not going to look great when I show them like the spreadsheet on what these things look like. You know, and we were also really excited about the IRA as well, because there's going to be some great, you know, direct pay, tax incentive breaks there too. But it's also a challenge because I found that as the costs have also increased to do some of these different development projects, that those increased, you know, tax benefits are still causing those projects to look and pencil out almost like they did a couple of years ago when the cost to build them were lower, but those tax incentives were down too. So these are also things that we have to struggle with as we look at, you know, these different funding sources and making sure that it's also a good investment and people can understand the whys, both financially and culturally.
And if I can then bring this back to where we started, the role of education and the tools that we can bring. Wonder if Mauricio could talk a little bit about the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool, which he led with in his discussion. How is that able to, or do you have plans for using that to help people understand the impacts of their decisions? And to advance the ability for folks to move forward.
Yeah, and that's the goal, that people are gonna use this tool to understand that, to really play with it. So that's why it's meant to like also be accessible to the public, not just to city officials. It's meant to be open to the public so that anyone can go and try out different combinations of things, and really think critically about what strategies are being offered. So for example, you can increase the percentage of electric vehicles, but doing that without really decarbonizing your grid is not gonna take you far. Your electric cars are as clean as your grid. So they can actually start seeing those relationships by themselves. And we have engaged with a number of college students throughout this process. We had capstone groups work with us, and of course with the university. And I think it's just something that we want to continue to develop over time. One really important thing here is that, normally these types of projects are not done in-house at the government agency because they're very large and all the data analysis involved. But we did it, and part of the reason why is that because we want this tool to be open for our communities to later continue to develop in any way they want, really being a resource for them, and take it and expand it and add more strategies, take out strategies, change assumptions. It really is meant to be something that it's continuously improve through dialogue with communities.
Great. So Mary, are there any final questions that we want to cover in the last couple of minutes before I turn it back over to Katie?
Let's see here. Maybe I could encourage the panelists to think about what words of encouragement do you want to leave us with from the perspectives of yourselves or your organizations.
And you each have 30 seconds or less to say that.
Institutional change takes a long time, but it lasts and it's worth it in terms of this work and getting like good policy and commitments on the books.
I have never seen this much momentum on climate change coming from so many places. And we're in a really unique point in time where we actually have very resource to do the work that we need to do. And the key to collaboration, the key to success is going to be collaboration and dialogue.
In our Ojibwe culture, we have the 7 generations kind of teaching where we look to the generations before us to understand where we can improve so we can make things better for the generations ahead of us. So having that eye on the youth and what kind of world we can provide for them in the future is really guide some of our goals and what we hope to achieve as an organization as well.
I'm going to let you go last, Deanna. I just think there's a torrent of opportunity right now. And as Mauricio says, all of this momentum, especially toward transportation. And so just thinking about, what is most impactful, what is transformative, and what is most practical for your local situation and how you can collaborate with others is going to be key to success.
Yes, and I just wanted to point out that there's such an amazing moment with so much wealth of information and also resources that we need to make the best to collaborate, but also always maintain an equity lens. I think that should be the core of our work.
Wonderful. Thanks so much to all of the panels, and especially to Mauricio for giving us a great foundation from which we could jump off, and encourage folks to continue to watch the developments in the planning tool and similar efforts that you all mentioned. I will say I had one question I thought I was going to ask about equity, and you all did a great job in incorporating equity considerations into several of your answers. So I let things roll from there, and encourage that, as Diana said, that we keep that lens as we go forward. So I see that we are closing in rapidly on 11:30 here, so I will turn it back over to Katie for some closing comments.
Great, thanks, Frank. Climate change can be a really disheartening topic, so it's really inspiring to hear from you all today, the great work that you're doing for our climate. I want to thank Mauricio for presenting, Frank for moderating, of course, our panelists, Eric, Abby, Deanna, and Kathleen, and of course, all the participants for being here today and for all your continued interest and work on climate change. So thank you and have a great day.